Mario is the head of innovation at Telefonica. He's been a key partner in the work that we're doing with Telefonica. And of course, Mario Didio, my boss, and the GM of network at Helium. And so today we're going to be talking about the Helium and Telefonica movie star partnership, uh, Helium Improvement Proposal 142, and sort of how that's enabled other third party providers to come into the Helium network, and how decentralized networks are leading the telecom innovation, and why Helium, of course, is the critical evolution of connectivity. So let's get right into it. Let's start talking a little bit about this telecom shift that we're seeing. So, Caesar, I'll kick it off with you. And I'd love to get into a little bit about, from Telefonica's side, what you see as the biggest challenges that these carriers are facing today.
All right. So hi everyone. Thanks for having me. Really happy to be here and share some thoughts with the community. So yeah, that's a really difficult question to answer in a very brief mode, but I'm going to try to give my snapshots of where we are as an industry and where we are as Telefonica. So obviously, as a central challenge, our key challenge is to move from being a global connectivity provider to becoming a global digital service provider, or in another words, becoming digital telcos. So going from a commoditized world where we were just selling connectivity into basically high growth, high margins, but also super competitive areas, which all of them are digital. So in order to go into these new areas, first you need to be like super customer centric, like more customer centric than ever. And this has been like super difficult and one of the biggest challenges for Telefonica and for most of the telcos, like becoming a truly data driven company in order to be able to deliver bespoke value propositions and be agile. Being agile is in fact the second biggest challenge that we have been working in the past years. So obviously this has to do with optimizing operations, simplifying processes, transforming all our stacks, all our IT stacks, all our systems, creating APIs and automating things in order to be able to be agile, to take propositions faster to the market and to basically compete with the digital players, which are not 100 years old and they were born digital and they are fast. Then the third challenge is to actually be able to go into this area. So, in order to achieve growth, we need to use connectivity and manage connectivity as our core assets. And then we need to leverage on that and build all our digital service portfolio, which is what we sell today. Today, we no longer sell managed connectivity only. We sell managed connectivity alongside with, so many digital services such as video services, cloud services, IoT services, security and cybersecurity services, and now in artificial intelligence services. So basically, you name it, right? We are kind of we have the confidence of our customers, and we try to help them become digital by bringing them all these incredible digital services. So we partner with a lot of players, and we no longer depend on ourselves. And last but not least, and I think this is where Helium and the infrastructure layer comes in place as a challenge, is we want, and the market is asking us to be much more lighter in terms of assets and infrastructure. So there is no real value anymore in holding lots of towers, lots of equipment. The real value that investors see is in actually being able to turn over those assets with very high ratios. And this is, where projects like Helium and other infrastructure partners can help a lot, because we no longer have to build all the infrastructures ourselves or own it, and we can basically partner or use third parties infrastructure in order to deliver our connectivity services. So those would be, the key challenges that we face and that we control. On top of that, of course, we are a highly regulated industry, so we also have like the big challenge of the regulators, which in the footprint where Telefonica operates is not a really nice one. Unlike the US, we are like not in markets where the regulator is nice, so it hasn't allowed us to consolidate a lot, and that obviously has been difficult for us in terms of getting high ARPUs from customers and being able to reinvest in modernizing networks. So that would be more or less the picture in terms of the key challenges most of them faced and worked throughout internally.
It's like a five-axis seesaw. You got to balance all these different things to make a company work. Um, this is actually a perfect time to hand it over to Santiago. Santiago, you've gone really deep on the telco stack, and I'd love to dig a little bit more into some of these challenges that Caesar highlighted and where you see these decentralized networks fitting in to help solve those challenges.
Totally. Thanks for having me. And um, certainly, I think dovetailing to what Cesar said, which is how do you take a telco asset and make it more efficient? An inversion, just for context, I've been investing in crypto for quite a bit of time, and it's really powerful technology. The question is, how do you go to market with it? Because really transformational technology just requires the user to think about seed phrases and setting up a node and mining. And the reality is, like, the internet had this problem too, which is you have these like hobbyists that love the technology, but that's not how you go mainstream. The technology, like on the Helium side, on deepened networks, stable coins, sediment layers, has evolved to a point where it became increasingly unclear to me why we didn't have more users, because the technology is really powerful. Um, so like that's why inversion exists, which is we are of the mind that in conversations with a Helium team or other deepen networks or stablecoin infrastructure providers, you say this technology can support 10 to 100 times more users. And so how do we get there, right? So that's like one idea. Um, an inversion deploys that, accelerates the deployment of deepen networks, accelerates the deployment of stablecoin infrastructure. Going back to what Cesar said, which is, you know, before crypto, I was an investor in software and just like take neobanks, for example, the financial services industry as a whole. Over the last like 10, 15 years, you have this like proliferation of neobanks, which is kind of like a in between step between crypto, full DeFi, and like banks. Banks similar to telcos 20 years ago had terrible NPS scores, like terrible customer service, really antiquated infrastructure. And then the idea was let's create neobanks that are leverage like technology first and service the user. And then you have companies
Mm-hmm.
like Revolut and Robinhood and Nubank that just have delivered a beautiful, simplified, customer-centric experience and have taken not only market share from traditional banks like that just aren't tech forward, but also just covered more ground because the reality is there's just a whole segment of the market that is just overlooked. And I think telco is in that juncture where banks and the entire financial services industry was 20 years ago. I see the same opportunity with telco today, which is I can't think of an industry that you have the most amount of connectivity with a user. It is an essential service, but the quality of the service is very much not excellent. And some players deliver marginally better experience. But the reality is there's a combination, and I would love to turn it back to Cesar, which is why is it that telcos have just been low MP? I think telco has the lowest net promoter score as a whole. Like if you take for people that are not familiar with this concept, net promoter score is the perception of like customer service and quality. If you survey users, like most users would say, I'm not particularly satisfied or happy with my telco provider, but it's, but I just have to use one. And it's sort of the least of the worst. And I think it's like 35 on a scale of 1 to 100. Uh, Banks have like 40, hospitals have like 50. The telco is the lowest out of any other industry. And we see a huge opportunity going back to this core concept of plugging in better technology to improve the quality of service for telco providers. And look, I'm not the person to think about this idea. I'm not that smart, but I will tell you, you have examples like M-Pesa in Africa, Safaricom, one of the largest telcos in East Africa, started in Kenya, expanded to other countries. they are the telco provider. They're also the bank for most customers. And you also have in Asia, you have WeChats of the world that started with social and then have expanded into telco. You have Nubank, this Brazilian fintech that has now expanded into telco. So again, to wrap it up, the core thesis here that we have in Immersion is that there is no reason why your telco provider can't be more than your telco provider, meaning your telco provider can be your bank when money is digital. And it is an industry that is very much ripe for disruption because, again, you're starting from it is a core essential service that everyone will continue to use. And it can be made fundamentally more efficient, and the customer experience can be very much improved, and structurally that business can be improved with better technology. And that's of course where something like Helium really fits into the equation, where stablecoins really fit into the equation. So I'll kind of pause there, but that's
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I mean, you've got me excited about the banking analogy because I don't think I've made a better decision than getting off of Wells Fargo. I think the final straw for me was when they couldn't figure out how to send a wire to a Revolut bank. Like they
There you go.
just couldn't. I ended up doing it with USDC on Solana. It was amazing. Not a better use case for crypto in the sort of DeFi sense for me. I'm not gonna get us too much into this circle a little bit. I want to close out this shift thought a bit with Mario here, and we'll get into some other fun stuff here as well. Mario, to close us out on this idea of this telecom shift, like we've seen telecom look effectively the same for decades. You've been in this space, I guess, for decades, right? I don't know to put you on the spot there, but why are we seeing change to be slow? And like, what would the telcos be doing without Helium? Like, where would they be if we weren't talking about this new model?
Well, I don't know about decades, but definitely 1.5. But enough to see that you're right, that when you look at the telco space, it hasn't moved much. Meaning, it's true, there are different technologies, there is different Gs, and the 3G, the 4G, and the 5G. Now there is satellite, D2D. There is all sorts of, always there is something new. But if you look at the terrestrial way of building networks, it's correct. Like fundamentally, it hasn't changed much. If you try to build in the traditional way, you do have to like secure a place to build a tower. You have to buy the tower, you have to buy the equipment, you have to do site leasing, acquisition, you have to wire up the fiber, and that has been pretty much the same with different type of like technology stack on top with 3 and 4 and 5G. The problem is that while that is becoming is the same, it is a pretty big cost. To give you an idea, the 3 carriers in the US alone last year, they spent more than $12 billion just on site leasing. If you add the operation, it goes around $50 billion for the entire network operation side of things. So that part is being the same. If nothing else, actually, is cost more because a 5G radio costs more than a 4G radio. On the other hand, you have this like both Santi and Cesar were talking. There is challenges around ARPUs and how do I monetize that type of asset. So that is a perfect recipe for stagnation. So without Helium, well, the options for telcos are dead. You either build your own infrastructure. There is also roaming agreements, so you can use someone else's infrastructure. But again, it's a big cost. That usually there's a lot of rigidity in those type of deals. Or you can go wholesale route. And again, while it might be good in certain for specific use cases, it's still very rigid. So what Helium brings is not only the ability to do this at a much better cost efficiency, but also in a very flexible way. And what I mean with that is something that we've been doing here with Telefonica, but we do in the US every day, which is carriers can essentially tell us where the coverage is needed, and then there is the Helium community that goes and build coverage where it's needed. And so not only it's a better cost proposition just purely on the capex opex standpoint, but also it's flexible and you can change it, you can shape it, and you can move it. And now you acquire a new market. You do a marketing campaign in a different region of the country. You wanted to have more customer acquisition in a different part of the country. You can you can follow up, or you can actually front load that with network coverage. So that type of mechanism, they're only possible in a build out model, which is very different than the build out model that's been.
Just to extend a little bit what Mario was saying, we come at it from, look, I'm not a telco expert, but we've certainly spent a ton of time thinking about and kind of coming at it from a unexperienced perspective and asking very basic questions. So in this journey, we want to understand what others have tried to do before us. And look, Mario says there, you correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not to say that Helium was the first one to try to think about offloading and creating a network of hotspots. Like, the reality is, I'm in New York now. AT&T, or a large carrier, has their own private network of hotspots, and they're going to offload. And smartphone technology has advanced to a point where the end user doesn't see that happening, but it's happening on the back end because they save doing that, right? And so in this journey of like thinking about if telco would be a right sector for inversion, I spoke with one of the founding team members of Skype, or Skypey, and he said, look, after Skype, this particular individual went and bought MVNOs in Eastern Europe, and he tried to do exactly what Helium did in the US. Problem was, to Mario's point, he said we would ship the hotspots to businesses, and we would say, hey, listen, install it, we'll give you some sort of incentive. But he said it wasn't enough. People just didn't plug in the hotspots, the reliability wasn't there. And honestly, when people ask us, like, why is this time different, and why is Helium, I say, look at the network, look at the coverage, and the proof is in the pudding. Like, why is it that AT&T and large carriers have decided to work with Helium? I think from the outside in, it's the reliability. And it's the idea that you can provide real-time performance benchmarks that give a large carrier like AT&T the confidence to work with Helium and offload to a network like Helium. And of course, you could say, look, Google's trying to do this as well with Orion, right? And so the question is, so why is Helium better than Orion? I don't think it's an either or. To Mario's point, it just comes down to, from the telco side, you always want redundancy, right? Such that you want to provide the best experience, and you never want to provoke churn in an industry that is very competitive. You want to make sure that you have multiple infrastructure providers, and if you can lower costs via offloading, if Helium has coverage in a remote area, you're going to go with Helium. And if I were to take the long-term view, I think that this is going to be Mario's point around flexible infrastructure spend is, I think, going back to the internet, like, you had a time where software as a service came around, and it just totally transformed and made certain businesses very viable, where instead of paying an on-premise license, high CapEx, you had flexible spending where software as a service you could buy per seat. In this case, you can flexibly create coordination campaigns where you can spin up infrastructure, crowdsourced infrastructure in remote areas to increase the coverage. And it's not the MVNO or the MNO that covers that, fronts that. It's a community that shares in the rewards. And I think it's a paradigm shift. I think we're going to see it in telco. We're seeing it in other areas with, Dawn and other deepened networks, but it's incredibly fascinating. I would say it's quite early, but the fact that I think Helium as a network is probably the farthest along in convincing really, really large companies into this idea that they can tap into deepened networks. And maybe HiveMapper, but Helium certainly is like really far along. And I think has made a lot of progress in the last 9 months.
There's a piece of that is just, it's the unsung here, and I think it has a lot to do with informing the user and that user experience that goes along with participating. Like, I've done the HiveMapper thing. They are vigilant about telling you to, like, have a clear picture of the road. Without it, that data would be worthless, right? Helium, the moment you set up a hotspot, it has this screen. I like to call it the front towards enemy thing. You take this hotspot, it goes in the direction of the people that you're trying to serve. And that's where we see oftentimes, other folks will try to do this offload over Wi-Fi, but there's no instruction to that user. So they put it in the closet way in the back, and that's not going to serve anybody. It's a key difference. Mario, I know you want to say something on that.
No, I think actually I liked a lot the internet analogy, because on the point of that flexibility, right? Like, there used to be before, packet-oriented networks. There used to be you would buy like a T1, like you would pi capacity in a very static way. And that still has a place today. So depending on your need as a business, you might just decide to have more of a traditional internet connectivity versus like best effort like packet routing. So all this to say that the flexibility is both in what Helium provides, but also the carrier side when there is reliability. And thank you for the shout out for the performance metrics. That was one of the things that I was going to bring out today, is that thanks to that, now the carriers have different tools. So depending on what they want to do, they will still have macro. They will, and I will never pitch Helium as a substitution. Whoever know about the way I like to put it, as a complementation, is an additional option. It's something that you can bring when it's needed. So in this way, you can have all the tools as a carrier to use the best tool for the job, the right tool for the right job. And so that's the thing. We're going to see more and more of that, and less of this static. There is only one way of doing this.
Cool. All right, I'm going to pull us into a different topic because I know we'll end up in this nerd snipe of metrics. I want to talk a little bit about the Helium Improvement Proposal 142, so HIP 142, and Santiago Inversion Capital's role here. So for context on HIP 142, this was a proposal that passed back in January, and we added, we as a network, added Inversion Capital as a international service provider on Helium. So that gives them this right to a carrier NFT, and they can stand up services. Santiago, first of all, I guess, table stakes here. Why did Inversion choose Helium as the platform for going global?
Yeah, it ties back to some of the things that I said earlier. So at risk of not repeating myself, it comes down to, I think it's one of the network that has the most amount of coverage. It has a very strong proof point in the United States, globally as well with IoT devices, but certainly in the US. And the reliability piece is something that as we went in and pressure tested, there's a person in our team that has a ton of telco experience. Some of our advisors have a deep telco old school experience, and it helps to bring those folks in and do, as part of this process, really understand as we think about buying large businesses, is the network reliable? And I think it does come down to that, there is something to be said about large MNOs in the US deciding to work with Helium. And we looked at other DP networks. I mean, I think the community is aware of other folks trying to do this. But also, I think it's just in my mind, the farthest along, the most amount of reliability. And I think we looked, of course, at the pilot that they're doing in Mexico. Mexico and Latin America is a region that we are very excited about an Inversion in acquiring businesses. I grew up in Mexico. I think if you combine Mexico as an example, you have a very large player called Carlos Slim, Claro, or America Móvil, and the telco dynamics in that country are interesting, such that offloading makes a lot of sense. And so there's just very interesting dynamics, I guess, that Carlos can corroborate to in terms of the shifting telco landscape in Latin America. And I think Helium has a pilot with Movistar in Mexico that I think is encouraging. And to Mario's point, it's not to say that you're going to totally replace, but I do think that even just creating a credible alternative to offload some percentage of the traffic has a very material impact in these businesses, because it's a very competitive industry. Margins are razor thin, and you're beholden to monopoly like structures, right? Where you're buying from players that just your per gig pricing is not very competitive. And if you can create a network in a place like Mexico or Peru or Colombia, it makes sense. And so for us, it's, look, we like to work with best in class protocols. I was aware of Helium since the days Multicoin invested in their early days, and I've been tracking the progress, and the team top to bottom is exceptional. And so that really, as we think about partnering with someone and helping accelerate the deployment, that's how we think about Inversion's role here. And the fact that Helium already has partnerships overseas was a very big signal to us that it was the right player and the right partner.
Right time. Yeah. So speaking of timing, I guess from January to now, we're in September, I guess. Um, I know the community is going to want to know this. Are there any updates on what you've seen in the progress on inversion of capital and some of this rollout?
Well, I could say we have looked at over 13 different telcos in the region. We are in active processes right now, so I'm not at liberty to talk about those because we're, obviously under NDA and they're competitive processes. So part of this is we can't show our hand, and we are aware of other people
Yep.
bidding, and so
They would shoot the
what
messenger if I didn't ask. So.
exactly. But I will say, look, we're very motivated. We have been very public about our intentions, and we've doing a lot of work. We've hired an exceptional team. We closed a very big round, so I would say pay attention next week maybe. And again, we're in active processes, and we see the thesis around telco and telco being a prime industry to leverage and implement this technology is very strong and sound. And so right now we're just trying to figure out, and we've done extensive work in Mexico, in Colombia, in Peru, and Uruguay. And so we've been busy. So if you're not hearing from us, it's because we've been busy and heads down, and
That's
but we're
always
excited.
a good reminder. Yeah.
Yeah.
People get nervous when they're not hearing, but
I will
that's when
have
the
a
work's
couple of
happening.
I'll say a couple of shout outs. The LongFi guys have been really good in this process too. Like Josh has been incredible. He's been a great resource to work with and just pressure test some ideas. I know he's active in the deployment down in Mexico. And, I'll remind the community of a couple of core concepts, which is we like to partner with folks. So on the deployment side, particularly of hotspots, we brought in a couple of investors when we raised this first round for immersion that are intimately familiar with Helium, intimately familiar with hotspot deployment. And so I think we've surrounded ourselves with really good partners to once we acquire a telco, we can very quickly do the implementation. But also, there will come a time where we will invite folks. I think the Helium community has. I've been very impressed by the caliber of the Helium community, like very deeply knowledgeable folks. Again, super like nerd
Fast
hobbyist
learners
types.
too.
Yeah, and fast learners, but also like really people that have a ton of experience in telco that they've lent. I think when I was in one of the earliest Discord community town halls, like I got flooded with inbounds from the community saying, if we could be helpful, give me a shout. And we followed up with many of them, and they're aware of what we're doing. And so in a hypothetical scenario where we buy something in say Mexico and we want to accelerate the pilot we going with folks like LongFi or others in the community to accelerate the deployment, there are going to be many opportunities for the community to get involved because we don't pretend to do it all ourselves is all I'm trying to say. And that I think has been since day one something that I've said, just put her on hold. We're going to cook, we're going to acquire something. When we do that, it's the right time to chat. But we've got an immense amount of support from the community, and it matters. Right? Why we going back to the initial question, why we decided to work with Helium? That plays a huge role.
That's awesome answer. This actually cues me up for a little plug that I wasn't thinking about before, but it's a good reminder for the $50 million coverage grant that is incentivizing deployments both in Mexico and the United States. And I have to
Joey,
run
I
the
thought
process
all
for
that was going
today.
on inversion.
If only.
You guys haven't wired the money.
Right. You're not in my list. I got to go run the queries for all those hotspots today because it.
No, don't worry about it. I just DM'd you I just DM'd you with the wallet address. So
okay, well, that'll make my job easy. But if you didn't know about it, the coverage grant, helium.com, look for the grants page. Can't miss it. There's some specs and details in there that I won't go into, but it's been a really key thing, and I know some of those deployers you've probably been working with or taking advantage of that really helps to get the ball rolling in those regions. So that's just an awesome tool to have out there. I'll shift gears a little bit because I haven't been throwing too much to Caesar. Let's talk. So we talked about inversion a little bit. Let's talk about this Telefonica partnership. So Even back in the early pilot days, Telefonica, I don't know if I should say Telefonica or Movie Star. It's kind of all the same in my head. But it was one of the first big carriers to publicly work with Helium. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about, on your end, what made you lean in. What have you learned from Helium's community and this community-built approach to offload?
So I think this was very, very early days, so even Mario wasn't part of Helium yet. So
Oh, wow.
imagine, I was speaking with Boris because I was like super impressed by the IoT deployment. I was one of the miners that deployed in Spain, and at that point in time, I was deploying networks in crazy manners in rural areas in Latin America. So for me, it was clear that this was a very powerful tool that could help in general connectivity and to bridge the gap with regards to the access to the digital world and basically or addressing all the unconnected population. So I spoke with Boris at that point of time. Helium was basically running an IoT network, which but was kind of useless from a service point of view because there was really a need for that in the market, and the telcos were already selling connectivity, and that technology didn't add a lot. So it was very clear for everyone at Helium that there needed to be a switch. The business model was amazing. The community was incredible. I think it was the fastest growing deployment that I've seen in my life. Also, the community reached the biggest global network in the world at that point with over 1 million hotspots. But the technology wasn't the right one to make the business grow and therefore continue giving the incentives back to the community. So there was a big shift. At that point of time, Helium was thinking on cellular hotspot, so basically proprietary cellular 5G stuff, which is obviously has some challenges because you cannot really use the same ones for every country because of the spectrum and things like that. So
CBRS
we
here.
went, yeah, exactly. We went in and we say, why don't we do Wi-Fi? Like keep the CBRS one going in the US. Let's see how that goes. But let's like really move into a unique unit that is like the LoRaWAN, but on Wi-Fi. And we basically work on that one to make it useful for telcos, right? And that's where really the project started. At that point of time, basically there was no technology there to make seamless authentication like we have today. So, Passpoint today, everyone talks like it was easy. Like the whole architecture, the whole thing wasn't there. So we designed it with the Helium team. Then Nova Labs came in and we basically started actually working on the actual hardware. Then the rest, like the hardware got certified. Now everyone is buying and deploying, and everything is working great. But everything from that design was so important to make this work when others didn't work in the past. So I think Santiago mentioned that this is not new. That we have been doing run sharing, we have been doing a lot of sharing things in the past. There has been lots of companies that have done similar things to Helium, but without the blockchain and the tokens things. But the technology wasn't right, so it didn't work. It didn't work because the quality wasn't there, the reliability wasn't there, and those are the things that we fixed for this solution. And I'm super happy that now it's working. I think one of the most important things for this solution to work that is different from the previous one in the past is that it's completely seamless for the user to connect. So this is Wi-Fi and cellular being merged for the first time, so the users don't really know and don't need to do anything. They don't need to log in into the Wi-Fi or logging into the cellular. They just logging into Helium, and Helium decides whether they are going to jump into the Wi-Fi or the other one. And that has a lot of technical, design behind the doors and a lot of technical things that were solved. We had the help of Open Wi-Fi, which is like a telecom infra project community, which was super helpful because they provide a really useful and powerful stack for us to bridge these two things together. And, at the end of the day, we made something work, which was not even designed at the beginning. So now in Mexico, everything is kind of moving in terms of actual deployments, and there is an actual operator from Telefonica that is actually willing to use the network for offloading. And the reason for that is because the network is working well. It's been designed in a telco way, so obviously the telcos are happy by the way it works. And I think the most important thing is to make it reliable. So it's simplest to connect, it's simplest to jump from hotspot to the mobile network and blah blah blah. But now the biggest challenge that remains is to make it reliable. And by reliable, I mean telco reliable, right? This is not something that can appear and disappear. The community cannot take a hotspot and bring it somewhere else just because there is more flow or whatever in the other place, because if you do that, the whole system will not be reliable, and then the whole community will lose. So for Mexico is a really good example, because we are not starting in the most sexy places, right? We are not starting in the places where the community would love to deploy hotspot because there is more traffic, more people, and you are going to get more returns fast. But we are starting somewhere where we are solving a pain point to the telco. So if we manage to solve the pain point to the telco and we start to get some traffic there, then the telco is going to be able to ask for other places which are more sexy. So at the end of the day, it's about having a system that is reliable. And I think that's what we need to continue pushing and continue working with the community to ensure that as a whole, the network is reliable for the use case that we are seeing, which is a amazing complementary network for offloading, both in terms of
Yeah.
densification and extension of coverage areas.
I'll say, well, I'm going to add a note here. We apparently have had 1,000 folks watching this stream. So there's definitely some folks out there that aren't familiar with what the network is. And we've talked a lot about the network. So the easiest way to go see what the network is world.helium.com. And then Caesar, you're talking about these initial areas. And so these are all marked on this map as expansion zones. So it's a little white logo with little blue dots in it. And so you can go and zoom in and understand exactly what's going on in all of those regions, what hotspots have been deployed there. Notably, this is very early, right? We haven't even activated the full offload yet. And that is coming this quarter.
That's coming.
Mario, yeah. Mario's like I love what Santiago was saying earlier. It's like, if you're not hearing from us, it's because we're busy, and we've been very busy. Although we do give, I think we try to get in and give updates on the mobile working group call. But that's what we're up to, is getting that stuff activated. I want to move just to sort of some wrap up questions here. This is sort of open to all of you guys, but I love these sort of pie in the sky ideas. Looking ahead 5 years, how big of a role do you think decentralized connectivity will play in telecom? Well, I already see Santiago, you just ate that one right up. Maybe we'll kick it off with you.
No, yeah, like it touches on a lot of things that we've talked about here. So again, at risk of not repeating myself, but it is transformational. Again, telco is an industry that has the lowest net promoter score. It is an industry that is ripe for disruption. I spoke with one of the best fintech investors that was behind the greatest neobank investments, from Stripe to Robinhood, and he said the same thing. They independently came to the same thesis, which is telco, the same transformation that you saw with banks and the financial industry is going to happen with telco, because again, you live with a customer 24/7. And if you want to convert, again, there's no reason why your telco provider can't be more than just your telco provider. And the reality is that the question is, why hasn't this happened before? And the answer is, it has in places like Africa and Asia. It hasn't in other places, because when you have monopoly or duopoly like market structures, they're complacent. That's certainly true in Mexico. It's certainly true in Latin America, because when you have a monopoly, because the capex requirement has been so high, it's an industry that has lent itself so much for monopoly, natural or government created monopolies. And I think that is going to change, for this reason, that you have decentralized physical infrastructure networks. It's a jargon word, but it ultimately just is this idea that you can crowdsource capex and you can create robust, reliable, and networks that have good coverage that compete pound for pound. And that's if Helium continues to do that, and if deepen networks continue to do that, then you create a really interesting dynamic where large MVNOs or even MNOs start using deepen networks, because it just comes down to you can source this infrastructure in a flexible capacity and in a cheaper capacity, and it really just comes down to that. And so that's what we care about at Inversion, is if we go and acquire multiple MVNOs, asset like telcos that have a good service. The big transformation is plugging in deepen. Why? Because we can source per gigabyte at a lower rate, as long as it's reliable. Because if it's not reliable, then this is a competitive industry, and you cannot provoke more user churn. And we're in the business of delivering extreme value to the end user. So incredibly, it pays to pay attention, because Helium, Joey, Mario, even Cesar, Helium a year ago is not the same, is not the Helium of today on a reliability standpoint. And a testament of that is large carriers like AT&T deciding to work with Helium, and that they've come a long way. They've pioneered some standards that from a coordination and reliability standpoint have come a long way. So we are seeing that. Yeah, we're seeing that in real time as we look. We don't have diehard loyalty to Helium. We're not maximalists by any stretch of the imagination. We're in the business of delivering the best value, and when we go and survey all the different providers, I can tell you the most important thing is the reliability, and that's very interesting to us. And Helium's certainly come a really long way, and we're very excited what's happening on the ground in real time.
Yeah, I think we as a team take that to heart too. It's like nobody's going to have any fealty to a particular network. They're going to go with the thing that works, and so we're constantly trying to deliver on that. I'm also taking that as a pat on the back because I moved to the Helium Nova team a year ago, so it was a different Helium year.
Joey, don't forget about our wallet address. About those incentive deployments.
Yeah. Cool. So, I'll open that question back up for both of you guys.
I'm just
5 years out. Yeah, Mario.
I mean, like Santi, I think really depicted in many ways the things I wanted to say, so I'll keep it short from my end. I think that's an interesting change in the playbook. So we have some challenges ahead that can be solved with a yesterday playbook from telcos. And even just if you stick on the technology side, the little other businesses Santi really wrapped up really nicely there. On the technology side, I think that the leveraging different networks with this thing that Cesar was mentioning, that is really the proof point of what we're doing with Telefonica, was this merging of Wi-Fi and cellular. So the idea of using multiple type of networks to serve customers is a thing that will continue to happen. You see it with satellites now in the space, right? Starlink and T-Mobile, for example, in the US. But in general, the telco will have to use more and more tools to serve their customer, and on top of the different business proposition that they can put on top. So I think the deepen, and specifically what Helium is doing, will be central to that, because we'll have many examples of that type of decentralized access to all sorts of different things that the telco can leverage. And so we'll see more of this. And I think we will go more from our curiosity in a way, more into part of the strategy, corporate strategy plan. We already seeing big carriers presenting at big conferences, what they call it, alternative build-out methods. I saw that, and I was very pleased to see one of the, namely AT&T slides, which is public. So alternative build-out methods. I like the name of that, and I think that alternative will become more and more part of the corporate strategy if we can keep up with the right reliability metrics and the thing that makes the build-out trusted.
Yep. Yeah. Trust and reliability and quality is the key tenets there. Cesar, I'll close this out with you.
Yeah, I don't want to sound very repetitive, so of course I am bullish on this idea of decentralized network. I am 100% aligned with what Santi and Mario said about, this is going to be a reality, and it's going to be another type of network that we are going to be seeing, growing and being used, especially in countries like the one Santi was mentioning, those with very low NPS, those where you can find monopolies or duopolies. So basically the US, some places in Latin America, maybe some places in India, definitely not in Europe, because obviously in Europe we have a very different, regulation is the opposite. So there is more operators in the UK than in the whole world together. So that you picture the situation, right? So obviously there the competition is fearless, the NPS is much better, and at the end of the day, the service that the telcos are providing is better, the network, the fiber, everything. But in the US, I think it's definitely a place where this is going to proliferate massively. And in Latin America too, because the network is basically depending on one or two guys in the whole region, and everything that accelerates that is going to help, and everyone is really eager to find other ways of communication, which are not the traditional players that basically provide a traditional service that has been there without change for many years. So it will not be global. I think it will be spread differently around the globe, but in some countries for sure this will be a very big part of the network strategy of each of the countries, for sure. And not only in access, I see this playing a big role in GPUs. I see this playing a big role in in general in physical infrastructure that is basically difficult to buy, difficult to install, difficult to operate and maintain, and where basically a community can very fast and furious connect things to be used by anyone. And I think access is one of the ones that you can see, but there is many others coming. GPUs being one that I think that will proliferate a lot.
Yeah, the
Go
entire space.
study software as a service. Deepin will do the same thing that software as a service did for the internet to antiquated capex intensive industries, and it will totally change the unit economics and viability of some of these business models in a very good way.
But you need a community that is reliable, because no one
Well,
wants to deploy in a Kubernetes that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. No one wants to connect into a network that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. So the community needs to be reliable. The hotspot cannot be there and then the next day somewhere else. And the community needs to be formal, because otherwise the business won't be formal.
Yeah, that's why we're focusing on that so much on the Helium side, because it's so central for this to succeed.
Yeah, look, crypto's good at one thing, and Bitcoin proved it in the early days, which is coordination. Be really good incentives, and of course, topic for a separate discussion about value accrual and tokenomics is really important. And I think that's one of the areas, candidly, where Deepin networks, they have really good product market fit, but the tokenomics can be improved. To go back to your point, Cesar, to make sure that the reliability is there, you have to go back and revisit. But look, I'm confident that this will be figured out, because the product market fit is there, so that you can restructure tokenomics, you can change the value accrual to make sure that the reliability continues to improve.
Yeah. Cool. And no shortage of iteration through our lifetime of the project. Keeps us busy. All right, gentlemen, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up here. Thank you so much for joining. Give all of these folks a follow. I believe all of their Twitter tags are tagged on this event space, so you definitely make sure that you're hearing what they are saying. Do follow the Helium account. We're going to be doing these live streams every 2 weeks. This is our first one on video. We've had 2 previous that were audio only. So we're excited to be moving to this new format. It's great to see faces. It changes the entire conversation. I love this. Thank you to the marketing team at Helium for organizing this. I won't dox you directly because they didn't want me to, but they are crushing it. You know who you are. And we will see you in 2 weeks. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.